My students will be like, "Oh, my professor."
Yeah. So hi, everyone. I see that we just went live, which is wonderful. Thank you so much for being here. I want to introduce a little bit of this panel and why we're all here today. So first of all, my name is Maria Novotny, and I'm an assistant professor of English at the University of Wisconsin-Milwaukee. So some of you who are joining us will know me. Some of you will not, because I'm not in creative writing. I'm in Plan B instead, but it's wonderful to have you all here. This was an idea that Jasmine Gonzalez, who's with us here today, you can wave, Jasmine, from Porchlight Books, proposed to us. So this is a whole event around planning your publishing career. We know that a lot of you here at UWM really want and are interested in these types of jobs. And so we're hoping that we can kind of demystify essentially what it looks like to actually work in the publishing field from a variety of different perspectives, and then also how to strategize, how to actually position yourself well to kind of get one of those jobs. So thank you so much. I'm going to do brief introductions for each of our panelists, and then we're going to kind of dive into things. There will be a moment at the end. So the last 15 minutes will be for questions and answers as well. So if you have questions that are coming up, feel free to populate those. We will be sure to get to them if they don't come up when our panelists are talking. So to begin then, I'm going to introduce Robyn Massey, who is a senior publicist at Columbia University Press. She transitioned into academic university publishing industry 4 years ago after serving as the vice president and chief communications officer for 2 top global public relation firms. At CUP, she handles publicity for the science and business portfolio, and she grew up in rural Missouri and has a bachelor's degree in political science and Asian studies from the University of Missouri at Columbia. So thank you, Robyn, for being here.
Thank you for having me.
Yeah, that's great. Next, then, we have Nina Nachalino, who is a managing director of Cave Henricks Communications, a full-service media relations and consulting firm for nonfiction authors and thought leaders. She has spent nearly 15 years in publishing, including time at Penguin Random House, Penguin Young Readers, and Harvard Business Review Press, working with some of the most influential minds in business, academia, and research, which it seems likely given all that credentials. She has a BA in journalism from Northeastern University and an MA in publishing from New York University. So thank you so much for joining us, Nina.
Very happy to be here. Thanks.
And finally, I already kind of pre-alluded, but we have Jasmine Gonzalez, who is the managing editor at Porchlight Book Company, which is here in Milwaukee. She began her career as a communication strategist for social justice advocacy organizations such as the ACLU of Wisconsin and Voces de la Frontera before finding her way into the world of books. She focuses on promoting new and upcoming nonfiction books, particularly those authored by individuals from marginalized backgrounds or published by smaller presses. She has a BA in political science and history with a minor in writing intensive English from Marquette University and an MS in nonprofit management and leadership from the University of Wisconsin-Milwaukee. So she's an alum. So thanks for being here, Jasmine.
Yeah, I'm so happy to be here. So happy to give back to my fellow UWM family.
Yeah, it's so wonderful. So thank you, everyone, really for joining us. We're really excited to have you all and just really learn from the variety of different perspectives, right, that you all represent in terms of, what it means to really work in the publishing industry these days. So what we wanted to do to kind of kick this off is to hear a little bit more about how you all got started working in these various industries and the various specifics of like what you actually do. So what does it mean, for instance, Nina, to be a managing director at a communications company? Or Robyn, right? What does it mean to work at Columbia University Press? So Robyn, can you maybe start us off and talk a little bit about this?
Sure. Yes. First off, thank you, Jasmine, for inviting me, and Kate, your classes, and all the folks who are here today to listen. It's great to be part of this, and thank you, Maria. So it's interesting because I wanted to bring to you my perspective But I also wanted to, this gave me a great opportunity to talk to some of my colleagues about how did they get here and, in the publishing world, and what did their trajectory look like. And so it was very interesting because everybody had very different ways, where we all ended up here at Columbia University Press. As you may or may not know, Columbia University Press has been operating for more than 125 years. We're affiliated with Columbia University, but also separate too. I mean, we have an interesting, wonderful relationship, but it's we operate ourselves, but we collaborate a lot with the university. And so a lot of the books that we publish, tend to be in about 5 or so different realms. And, that can be literary studies. It can be literature and translation. That's probably some of the pathways that you might have connected with us. But also we have, social science, we have, and then I'll talk more from the perspective of our business publications that we work with, and our science as well. A lot of our authors tend to come through Columbia, but like 70% or so are from other universities as well. So it can really be, we could be working with a professor or an adjunct or, a scholar from anywhere in the world. I tell you all this just to give you a little bit of context. And so when I I have a weird trajectory, as I kind of alluded to, where when I was graduating from University of Missouri, it was during a deep recession. And I didn't really know what I wanted to do with my life. I majored in political science and Asian studies. But I wasn't sure what I wanted to do. Frankly, I probably should have been, sitting with you and doing, English or literary studies, because that was really where my passion was. But I thought, I need to make money. And I wasn't sure if that was going to be a pathway to do that. And so I imagined myself maybe doing lobbying or something like that in Washington, D.C. But when it came down to it, I wasn't sure. So I went to this program called the JET program. I applied for that, which is Japan Exchange and Teaching. And it's a 1 to 3 year program, depending on how long you want to make it. And, it's teaching English in high schools and junior highs in Japan. And it pays well. You don't have to pay taxes. So that solved some problems for me. And then what was nice was that, it was not just about teaching English language, which was fun to do with the students and to work with the English language teachers of the schools that I partnered with in the classrooms. But it was also the Japanese, it wasn't just the education ministry, it was a Japanese foreign ministry that sponsored this. So it was the other goal was to internationalize Japan. And so it was sort of the cultural side too. So in a way, I was a bit of an ambassador of language and culture with a little a. And that got me started, in my career. And then I came to New York after 2 years of that, which I loved. And then I thought, well, I need to get my real job in the US. And so I did public relations, and I worked for a restaurant group that was one of the top grossing restaurants in the United States at the time. It's called the Rainbow Room. And then they also did Windows on the World as well. So I worked as the director of PR at the Rainbow Room and Windows on the World, which didn't mean anything to me, frankly, when I was in Missouri. But when I moved to New York, I at that time there was no Google, so I went to the library and did a LexisNexis search when I got a call to say, hey, would I like to come in and interview for this? And all this media coverage was just amazing about this restaurant. And they were real leaders in the industry. And that was cool because I think what that opened up for me was the opportunity to work with, people who are thought leaders or influencers in their industry. So these were top chefs, top sommeliers, top, everything, designers, everything that goes into what my boss at the time called the music of dining. And so from there, I did that for like 5 years, and there wasn't really any place else for me to go within the company in communication. So I went to work for a PR firm, which I did for a good 17 years, half of which were in New York City, half of which were in London. It was a really great career, for me. But I started to get burnt out a little bit, I'm going to be honest. And, my time wasn't my own. Always a crisis would come up on Friday evenings, and that would go my weekend. And I just got a little tired of all that. And also, I wanted to do something that I felt was, instead of trying, and we weren't laundering people's reputations, but instead of just working for, big corporations, I kind of wanted to get to ideas and, feel proud about, connecting with, different types of topics and ideas and important, people who were doing things that I thought were important. And so I thought, okay, I either want to work in academia, I can apply my communication skills, at a university. Wouldn't it be nice? I live in Harlem. Columbia is very nearby. I'll just go there if I can get a job. And but then the other part of me was like, well, I really like books. I love authors. I love, the publishing idea of the publishing industry. Well, lucky me, in my, and we can talk about this later, but like in sort of the cold calling that I wound up doing, if you will, led me to a referral for this job. And this person just reached out that I hadn't known, but I had a coffee with this person. And she said, I just saw this job listing at Columbia, and it's for the, book publishing. You should apply. And so I did, and that's how I got here. And so, like I said, it's science and business, and my job is to bring great books out into the world. And it's really fun too, because I get to partner with people like Nina, who, and we can get into all that later, so, and then also I get to partner with people like Jasmine, or at least pitch her, or, bring things to her attention. So it's really cool. This is a great panel because it's really, full circle for me. So I'll put a pin right there, and we can get into some things like some examples of how you might go about getting a job, things you might want to think about. Thanks.
I can go next. So like Robyn, I also work in publicity. Cave Hendricks Communications is a full service boutique media firm. We work primarily with nonfiction authors, also in the business space, social science. We do some softer topics like parenting and personal development and things like that. And our goal is really to sort of publicize the book across different media outlets, whether that's traditional reviews and big national dailies, or, broadcast interviews when you're listening to NPR and you hear an interview on Fresh Air, things like that. So there are people behind the scenes booking those things. That is what I do. So I've been doing this. I've been in publishing for about 15 years almost, which is crazy to me. I started out as a journalism undergrad at Northeastern. By the time I graduated, the newspaper jobs were not the same as they were when I started my journalism career at school. And so I tried a few different things. I kind of landed in marketing jobs. I went from Boston to Philadelphia, worked as a copywriter for brand marketing, things like that. I didn't love any of that. And I decided to move home. I'm from upstate New York, and save some money and really think about what I wanted to do. I was a I enjoyed the children's lit class that I took, but I was a lit minor in college. So I took another children's lit course, just remote during that time. And I thought maybe I'll go into books. I've always loved books. This is like, something that I care a lot about. So I did some research and I ended up at the NYU Summer Publishing Institute, which is a summer program. And I think they have them at like Denver and Pace. Columbia has one, I believe. There's at least a handful of them, if not more. But it's a really intensive summer program. When I was there, it was split between books and magazines. I don't know if that's the case now. I would guess probably not, just based on the landscape of the media. But it was really a great introduction to all of publishing for me. They had editors come in, marketers, publicists, editor-in-chiefs from different magazines or different publishing houses, and they came in and just talked to us about what they did. They'd bring books, they'd bring magazines. So it was like a very full scale indoctrination of what is publishing. And from there, we also then had a lot of contacts in the industry that we were able to call on and sort of have these nice informational chats with. I ended up getting an internship at Modern Bride, which was a magazine at the time that has since folded, along with many others. And magazines was not for me. It was fine, but I decided to switch and go the book route. I landed at Portfolio, which is the business imprint at Penguin Random House. It was just Penguin at the time. And I learned a lot there, sitting in on editorial meetings, titling meetings, sales meetings, stuffing early copies into jiffies and sending them out the door to journalists at their offices. And from there, I went to Young Readers, still at Penguin, and did some licensing and marketing. I really liked being in Young Readers. The one thing I will say that I found, it was tricky to move up in the same publishing house. And so a lot of times people will move horizontally to another house or to something else and then move up later. So after I decided to stay in the master's program at NYU after the Summer Institute was over, I got my master's in publishing. And when that was done, I had a friend who I was in the Summer Institute with, who was working at Harvard Business Review Press at the time. And I was kind of looking to move back to Boston. And he said, hey, there's a publicity assistant job open. And I had sort of dabbled in marketing and editorial and lots of different things. And I needed a job. And so I said, okay. And so I applied and I got it. I've been doing publicity ever since. So, and I really enjoy it. I mean, it's a really wonderful career path that I have. And I feel very lucky to be able to work in publishing. Books are never going to go away. And I think we have, certainly everything has changed and it will continue to change, but I think we have the great opportunity to work across many different new opportunities with people like Porchlight and with in-house folks like Robyn at academic presses or trade publishers and things like that. And so I'm quite happy with what I'm doing and it's been great.
That's great. Thank you so much for sharing, Nina. I'm sure we'll have some more questions. Sure. It was nice to hear about hard to move within publishing houses and thinking around how you might navigate that. So I'm sure there'll be more questions. Jasmine, can we hear from you?
Of course. Yeah. I just want to say I love the serendipity of everyone finding their positions, because I think that's kind of how we've all come into where we are now. Obviously there's, your resume and what you study and all of that good stuff, but then it really just comes down to the right place, the right person, the right moment. So that's definitely what happened for me. I went to college. I went to Marquette for my undergrad in political science. This was during the first Obama term. So everything about politics was so inspirational and everyone felt so hopeful. And it just felt like the dawn of a new era. And so of course I was political science, let's go right into it. What a great field. And granted, I do love the study of political science and all that. Well, whatever, we'll get into that later. But so I went into political science. I did tack on a writing intensive English minor. I always loved books. I always loved writing. And I had a professor, an Irish literature professor, who, after I wrote a couple of, pretty good essays, was like, I really think, if you don't switch majors from political science to English, at the very least, like tack on the minor. Probably should have listened to him about switching majors, but I did the minor, so that's fine. It all works out in the end. And so from there, I got my first job out of college at the American Civil Liberties Union of Wisconsin. And so that was my foray into the nonprofit world, political advocacy, all of that good stuff. And I was there for about 3 years, and then moved on to other kind of local organizations, couple national organizations, and was pretty much doing political advocacy until 2020. After the 2020 election, it was, this was still the height of the pandemic. And I think after really any election cycle, a lot of people tend to just naturally lose their jobs anyway. But with the pandemic, it was kind of accelerated. So end of 2020, I found myself, out of a job, stuck at home, kind of wondering what to do next with my career. I was definitely burnt out at that point as well. Like, politics is great, but it is also really heavy, really emotional work. And it's just putting out fires all the time. So with that kind of unexpected free time, I started just like picking up books, reading for fun again, because I realized I hadn't really read any books that weren't, for grad school or for work or anything. I started reading for fun, and I just started kind of posting like on Instagram. I started a Substack and was just like sending out little newsletters to friends and such, and was really just doing that as a hobby. Really wasn't like trying to get a job or anything, was just kind of filling the time and doing something I cared about. And I just so happened to connect with someone who is now my colleague, our creative director, Gabby, here at Porchlight. And there was an open position at Porchlight, and she said, like, hey, I've seen your stuff, you are, posting about books, and we're actually looking for a social media manager for Porchlight, which clearly I was kind of already doing on my own. Do you want to come apply and interview? And I did that and landed the job. And that is what I have been doing for the past 2 years. I have since kind of moved on from social media, and I'm now the managing editor. So I manage a lot of our editorial work here, which for us involves, book reviews, finding excerpts from books that we want to showcase, basically anything that has to do with like, hey, here's this cool book, you should read it. That's what I'm kind of helping to do. So I'm working with publicists, working with publishers, authors directly sometimes. And just kind of, putting the books out into the world is where I sit at the pipeline.
That's great. Thank you so much for sharing, Jasmine. I think it's also helpful to hear a little bit just how, personal networking, knowing Gabby can help you also find an in, right? And how important it is to kind of maintain those connections. But I think it also points a little bit to having conversations again about what Robyn was talking about like, how do all three of you interact or work together, right? How does all the pieces kind of combine? So I was wondering a little bit if you can talk a little bit about the publishing process, specifically with how that relates to the sector that you all work in, but then how you all interact and collaborate together to kind of like, showcase a little bit more about how those relationships are really integral to promoting and doing publishing work in, 2024. So I don't know what it makes sense to go first. Probably not Nina. Yeah, Robyn.
I think so, because it's actually, it works. It will. You'll see. So, well, as I was kind of thinking about this, I think it's useful to think about, once a book comes in, I don't know that you guys can see this, but a lot of, once a book comes in, right, there's like kind of three big buckets. So you've got the editorial, so that kind of connects the author with an editor here, with a manuscript, right? And then it starts to go into, once the readers and, once it's decided, okay, yeah, we're going to take it, then it goes into production, to get it all laid out, to get the cover done, figure out what the schedule's going to be, all that kind of stuff. And then, once the book is kind of like almost done, and we call that like the first pass pages, and I think that's an interesting thing, by the way. Whenever you get jobs and in publishing, all the nomenclature and things like that, it's so you got to get used to it, but then it becomes really, secondhand. And that's going to really be important when you take jobs, that will help you with your next job, because you know how to speak the lingo and everything. But in any case, so I get like the manuscript on an early cycle before it's really been 100%, checked for like all the grammar and things, punctuation and things like that, and fact checking some things maybe. So I get that. And then I start, because it'll be early, like at least, let's say 6 to 4 months before the book's pub date. So that's a date that we declare, and we say, hey, this book, the publication date of this book is, let's say March. Okay. And so like I will have gotten the early pages of it, and then I will take the book, that manuscript, and I will let the New York Times know. I will let, different people know. I'll let Jasmine know. And I'm sorry, I don't know. I kind of forgot like where I was going with this, and I feel like, oh yeah. So anyway, I'm giving a lot of detail, sorry. But essentially my job is to start getting out to early reviewers of the book that have long leads. And that's like the job. And then, funny enough, like by around the time that the publication date happens, and before that a bit, is like kind of where Nina comes in, because, and if an author is lucky enough to have resources, extra money that they can spend, they would hire Nina, because I'm working at any given time on about 20, 30 books, and that's backlist books. So this could even be a book that like ran 2 years ago, but the author is still reaching out to me, hey, I've got an event here and there, and so I'm doing backlists. And then I'm also already, because before I even get the manuscript of a book, the 6 months out, I am putting together publicity plans for books that are going to come out is several months, away, and we don't even have a manuscript for it. So I'm always toggling between a lot of books. And that's why, somebody who is able, would hire like Nina, because Nina can I'm sure you're not working on 20 books. I mean, you can correct me if I'm wrong, but she can really focus and on a little bit before the publication date, and as it hits, so she can talk a little bit about the timescales on that. And then I can pick up later about Jasmine, but Jasmine, she indicated she's always looking for reviews to do. She's looking for excerpts. So I, when and as I have time to think about a cogent, pitch for Jasmine, I can, reach out to her and say, hey, we've got this book coming out in March. I really think your audience would love it. And here's some ideas, or hey, do you want to take a look at the whole manuscript, see what you think is jazzing you and your audience, and it's works like that. And then if we're lucky, Jasmine runs something. And also I would just say the part about buying books, right? It's a really big, obviously we're doing all this work so people will buy books and we can sell our books. And that becomes interesting because we have our sales reps, who work on that. And then we have kind of intermediaries, I guess you could call, of Porchlight, who have their specialisms. And they do a great job of being able to get shipments kind of in a fluid way out to people, say, hey, I'm Procter & Gamble, or, I'm trying to think of a Wisconsin company. I can only think of Laverne and Shirley right now and beer. But but in any case, like, hey, we're having a team meeting, a bunch of leaders are going to get together. We want to have like $50 to give away. So they might call Porchlight and say, hey, oh, great, I see a discount, cool, and it just makes it really seamless. So you can see I kind of, work in a lot of different ways. I definitely would consider, like Nina, when she's working on one of our books, a key partner, to a given title, for a given author. I would think of Jasmine as a key partner, especially for business books, that hopefully, we're printing something that's interesting, to her audience. And, so those are the kind of ways that I would work. So Nina's more behind the scenes. Jasmine's more like, gets us,
interacting.
She gets us coverage. Yeah.
That's really helpful. I appreciate you kind of, from your perspective, showing how you work with both partners. And Nina, I was wondering if you can talk just a little bit also about obviously what you do kind of like in your day-to-day with it. But I think it might be helpful also just to have people who are watching this be reminded why publicity is important.
Yeah. So Robyn is right. Everything, when I was in-house, everything is very interconnected. Marketing, sales, editorial, publicity, everyone's working together. Once an editor comes, they've, gotten together with an agent and an author, there's a book, it's signed, everybody's working together. There are a lot of meetings, titling meetings, jacket meetings, marketing meetings, all these different things. And so that's sort of the engine that's running in-house. Over the course of we've signed it and now we need to get it to on sale. I think, to Robyn's point, having outside publicity is helpful in that it's just an extra pair of hands. So I was in-house for 8 years. I was in a lot of meetings that whole time. It was a whole different kind of education. And, those marketing and publicity are things that are available to authors when they sign with an in-house, a big publisher, that they get with that signing. It varies from house to house. Some are better than others. Some have more resources than others. But I think they are important components. Maria, to your point, if we always say media begets media. So if you're listening to your favorite podcast and you hear an author on it 2 weeks, say 2 weeks before a book comes on sale, then the following week you're on the subway and you see, someone, reading an article about it in a magazine, or then, you click through to something else and you see a Substack about the book coming. So it's sort of it's those 3 marketing points or those 3 publicity points that sort of drive the sale. At least that's the formula that we've always thought about. Publicity is tricky to measure. There's no metric except, if you just say, hey, our author was on Good Morning America on this day, and we can look at that day and see if there was an increase in book sales that day.
There will be.
There's really no metric, but it depends on the book too, right? It depends on the book, and I think that's something that is changing, and more there isn't a straight formula for all of these different titles. You really have to kind of go where the audiences are, whether that's on TikTok or on Substack or in a traditional media, like a big national daily or something like that. There are some that still definitely sell books. Fresh air. Everybody wants fresh air. Every author that I've ever worked with has said, I want fresh air. It's very hard to get. But our job is to take the book and the ideas in it and the author and tie it to things that are happening in the news, have them write op-ed, guest articles, place excerpts with Jasmine at Porchlight and other places that run short snippets from the book to sort of give you, the reader, a taste of what the book is like so that you will then go buy that book. And I think, the culture of being in an agency, like I am now, it's different. I mean, it's a much slower pace in-house. There's a lot more meetings. That was my experience. Agency, you are delivering on somebody else's money. So if an author hires you, you have to deliver. If a publisher is hiring you, they're paying you to deliver results. So to me, there's always been a little more hustle, a little more sort of edge on the agency side. but it's the same thing. Like what Robyn is doing and what I'm doing are the same. We're still pitching media. We're still trying to get as much coverage of the book as possible. And oftentimes we're working with in-house teams all the time. And so there's a lot of collaboration, a lot of cooperation, because there's usually more than one publicist, and you don't want to step on toes and have both people pitching, morning edition, the same book. That doesn't look coordinated, and that's not good for anyone. So there's a lot of people involved in the process, but I think the trick is to just make sure you know what everybody does and be flexible and play nice because we're all on the same team. Like the goal is to drive sales and get the book out to as many places as possible. And so I don't think you do yourself or anyone else any favors if you sort of are, protective of contacts and things like that. At least that's my own philosophy.
No, that's really helpful. It's really interesting to hear how essential really what you're doing is so vital to kind of just people reading the book and knowing about the book. And I was wondering, Jasmine, if you can talk a little bit about when you come in. So obviously Nina's doing a lot of this once the book is out and available to purchase, but for your reviews and everything, Jasmine, like at what process are you working closely on producing the items you need to help with the publicity?
Yeah, so a little background about Porchlight Book Company for starters. So we are a book selling business. We were actually born out of the Harry W. Schwartz bookshops here in Milwaukee, which was a chain for many, many decades. Unfortunately, kind of had to shut down, when like Amazon came on the scene and kind of these big box stores took over. Still kind of exists, if you're at UWM, you probably know Downer, books on Downer Avenue. So that is one of our old locations and still run by people who were involved at Harry W. Schwartz. And Porchlight was originally the business book section of the Harry W. Schwartz bookshop. So it started off as kind of its own desk. It had its own kind of staff. And Jack Covert, who was, then became the founder of Porchlight as a separate company, realized that business people in particular wanted multiple copies of the same book. For example, I'm doing an employee training. I want all of my, 50 employees to read this book, and then we're all going to talk about it. Rather than try to go to the store and be like, hey, I need 50 books. I'm going to grab them all off your shelf and then order me some. We kind of realized there's a direct pipeline where we can work with publishers. We can get, 50, 100, 1,000 books, however many, and ship them right to you. So it became this it's not quite Amazon. It's not quite an store like bookstore. It's its own kind of thing with a very specific niche, which is really cool. And it's one of the things that you're like, wow, really? Is there a need for this? And there is. They're moving books in high volumes all the time, which is really cool. So that is our bread and butter. That's, what we're doing is we are selling books. We are booksellers. And we still very much believe that we have the same spirit as any bookseller in a Barnes and Noble or a local bookshop. Is we love books and we are trying to get them into your hands. And yes, we're making money, right? But that's our business. So, we're doing that. We're moving these books. And so where I'm at in the marketing department is an interesting kind of in between where it's almost the last step where, if Robyn has been working on this book in-house, maybe her author is working with Nina to get the publicity out, they're funneling it down to me as the last person in the line who kind of gets the book maybe a month or two ahead of, when it's published. I get to look at it before anyone else does, and get to decide how much coverage do we give this. This is an awesome book. I'm going to personally write a book review about it, or I really love this chapter from it. I'm going to turn it into an excerpt or anything like that. So we are that extra boost of we will also publicize it. So NPR is doing stuff, New York Times is doing stuff. And we're also in that same kind of arena of here's this awesome book that as booksellers, we recommend to you. Because there's just something I think a little special about someone who's really in the book world, being able to say this is a specific book that I think you should read. I love going to indie bookstores just for that, having someone hand me a book. So that's kind of the way we approach marketing. And so, yeah, I will get books from publicists, sometimes from the publishers directly. And again, very rarely, but sometimes from the authors themselves too, especially if they're self-published or anything like that. And yeah, I get to, read the books, and we get to decide like how we're going to cover them. And then we also have our sales team, and they're really working on like moving the books and all of that. And we work in tandem with them as well. So if they have a really big sales campaign, that might be something that we also kind of partner with them to say like, oh, we'll also cover it. We'll give it extra like, marketing, a little extra marketing spotlight, and then we move that book for them. So that's kind of where I'm at. It's like once everyone has kind of done all the other work, we're actually pushing it out to the readers, and that's, after that it's out in the world, and readers get to enjoy the fruit of all of our labors here.
That's really great. It's really helpful, I think, for students to hear a little bit again about how each of you are working in these various different sectors, right? But they all really are codependent upon each other for the success of the book. So I really appreciate you sharing all that. I know that we are going to go and get into a little bit of, each of you talks about how you had nonlinear starts to your careers. And I know students are going to want to know a little bit more about how perhaps they could have maybe more of a linear start if that's possible. But before we do that, actually, I think this is related, and something prompted me in the chat. I'm just curious if you see any new trends happening in the world of publishing. Like, Nina, I know you were talking about like just social media in general and how that might be shifting. But if there are any things that students, or even us as faculty members who are teaching students, should be considering or thinking about that maybe aren't on our radar, or are shifting the ways in which your work is changing on a daily basis, if that makes sense.
Yeah. I mean, I think at least for publicity, for a long time, we were sort of taught that, the gets that we need to chase are those big, New York Times book review or the Wall Street Journal books coverage. And those are all really important things still. But I also think, and same thing, morning shows, primetime shows, broadcast is important. It is. But I think the places that book buyers are going are different now. And so it's not just those traditional outlets. I'm still a newspaper reader. I don't know how many of your students are newspaper readers, but I'm sure there are other places where they get their news and information. And so I think over the last, 10 years or so, there's been like these sort of waves of different things. And for publicity, for a long time, authors didn't want to do podcasts. They were like, no, they're small, that they don't matter. But I think, it's very obvious that podcasts, the right ones, can have a huge impact. It's an audience that has opted in. They care. They probably care about the topic, and so are that much more likely to then go buy the book. I think the same can be said for Substack now. There's a lot of really smart, trusted journalists who have been doing things for a long time, who have gone off and created their own avenues to write, to share their ideas. And I think you have to sort of find the book audience wherever you have to meet them where they are. For instance, I worked on this really great book. I'm working on it now. And like the audience is perfect for the isolation journals. And so that's like a very non-traditional outlet for us. That's not something that I would typically pitch, but they often have people who write. Oftentimes those writers have books. And so that's an example of me pitching something that's not like hey, can you review this book? Or, hey, can you interview this author? But, hey, this author has something really valuable to say that I think your readers will care about. And, oh, by the way, they also have a book, and can you just put it in their bio line? And so it's really it's changing. And I think you have to adapt. Otherwise, you just won't get the results in publicity.
Yeah, I can go ahead.
Yeah. Oh, go ahead. Well, so I would just say 100%, like everything she says, 100%. And, I've seen like media graft, at certain points where, graft against sales and audience and such. And so like, let's say it was, the book was on, fresh air, you would see like a huge spike, right? And it'd be like big. But then let's say that, Nina and I are collaborating and we're able to get a whole bunch of kind of small podcasts, Substacks, mentioned here, mentioned there. You would see what, folks call a long tail, right? Mm-hmm. So all that long tail, like all those little things, one, you add them up and that's a lot, but also like there might be that one thing that somehow somebody else hears, maybe Terry Gross, caught it or something, and that's how it ended up on Fresh Air, or just something like there's like these little spikes that happen and one thing leads to another. So that's just to say 100% agree, with what Nina is saying. And I would also just add that, authors need to be very open-minded, as do we. I had the privilege of meeting Min-Jin Lee, who wrote Pachinko and Free Food for Millionaires. And she was saying, when she was doing her work for Pachinko, her publisher said, if you're invited to something and they want you to dress up in a bunny suit, dress up in the bunny suit, So that was like how far it was going. I don't know that Minjin needs to do that anymore, but, nonetheless, there's a lot of competition, for every book that me and Nina are working on. Jasmine will tell you there's like so many more books, and I'm sure you just get so inundated. I can't even imagine how you can cope sometimes. But figuring out how to tell the story in the right way at the right time, pegging into those, to the right person who really cares about the topic or to something that's newsworthy that's happening today. So just to 100% agree. And then to kind of signal to another trend that I'm noticing, which is more in the production cycle of things. So typically at Columbia University Press, we've always been very catalog driven. So like I'm showing you here, there's a fall and a spring catalog, and so that now though, we're not so focused as much on catalogs and more on, when are things coming out, and there's a lot of reasons for this, because it used to be like behind the scenes, like as we're working up to a catalog, everybody's like working like insane to get it done, whereas actually, the manuscript can come in and there's no reason to just be held to this artificial deadline. So that's the other thing I would just say. The production schedule piece of things is starting to be looked at differently, within our house anyway.
Yeah, no, that's really interesting to kind of, I'm sure you can say more later if there's another question about why that is. But thank you for sharing. And Jasmine, you mentioned a little bit, just about like how Porchlight came to be. I do remember Harry Schwartz. I remember those bookstores. I've not heard that in a long time, but I do remember them. And how that kind of influenced on like the creation of Porchlight. So I'm just curious if there are other new trends or new decisions that are impacting what Porchlight is doing, or how, if at all, it's shifting your work.
Yeah. Oh man. I'm sure there's like a ton of trends just like on our sales side that are probably different that I can't really speak to. I think just how we market books, it's always changing. I think when I was in the political field, I remember like I got handed my first like communications like task is like, oh, you're a millennial, Facebook, right? Like run our Facebook page. And it was like a lot of that marketing was very accessible. You could just, if you knew how to use the platform, you could put information on there and people would actually see it and interact with it. And so getting information out into the world was a very easy thing. And back in those days, all of like a decade ago, if you had 100 followers on your account, those 100 people, would see that post and maybe like 70 or 80 of them would interact with it. So it was a very like you understood how like I put this thing out, people see it, they take an action or they read it, whatever, like it all works. And nowadays, like we're fighting with like, algorithms, like you put stuff out there and people will ask like, oh, I haven't seen your account post in a long time. And you're like, I just posted 2 hours ago, so it's a lot of just like, even when you're putting really good stuff out there, you're just kind of like fighting a lot of algorithmic stuff. Just the sheer volume of content is also kind of like you're swimming with even more stuff that is out there. And so I think we're constantly thinking about, how much energy do we focus on something like social media? It's still valuable, but like it's not as straightforward as it was when I was, coming out of college. And that was something that I could just very easily like, oh yes, this is how we do it. Our social media strategy is very simple. So it's, in a lot of ways, I think we're actually kind of looking backwards to see like what worked before social media and how can we bring elements of that in. And so something that we kind of started up during the pandemic when we couldn't have, in-person author events at the bookstore or anything like that, is we started offering virtual like author interviews. So usually our managing director or sometimes somebody else on our staff will actually interview an author about their book. It's usually like a 1-hour thing. And anyone can, access it. They sign up for it, they can watch it. And so it recreates that in-person experience. And so that's obviously something that's been going on, pre-social media and is still going on today. And so it's been like a lot of adapting some of those, like what used to work for us and how do we reincorporate that. So yeah, it's a very interesting time to kind of just keep an eye on like what's new and developing, but also remembering like what has worked for us in the past as well as kind of the new trend, if you will.
No, that's really interesting. It's actually so interesting and kind of refreshing to hear that you're looking at beyond just social media. Like let's move out and think about what works before. That was such a pull. So thank you. Really helpful. So I think with the time that we have, because I want to make sure that we have time for questions, I know people are dying probably to hear, okay, so I heard a little bit about how each of you started your careers, how they were kind of, all of them were nonlinear, it seems like in many ways, which as a former English major myself makes sense to me. But I guess if you can talk specifically about any tips or ideas about either where to look for a type of job in your sector or what it would look like to get an entry level type of job, say working at Columbia University Press, what would those steps be? What would it entail? Thinking of someone who might be a graduating senior or might be someone graduating like with their master's, for instance. So maybe we start, Robyn, with you, and then you each can talk a little bit about your own sector in that way.
100%. And, summer internships as well, I might add. It's really interesting because, I think getting into, how to get an internship, for example, I think, or a job, an entry-level job. The key places you might want to look is called Handshake. I don't know if that means anything to you guys. I've never used it, but it's supposed to be very good for this. And that's what we use for when we're putting job descriptions out there. So Handshake, we also post it on our website. So, look at the websites and of the organization that you want to join. I'm imagining LinkedIn, and that is how I did when I said the cold calling. I did some LinkedIn, notes, to folks, and said, hey, I'm looking to do this. Would you be willing to have a quick coffee? And try not to, position it so you're not going to take much of their time. Like love to drop by. I'll bring some coffee. We can chat real quickly, So those are kind of the ways I would go about it. And then in terms of like getting credentialing yourself, if you will, I mean, beyond the fact that you're already, English majors and such, working in bookshops. I mean, we hired an intern. We were talking to about 3 different interns, and the one who had worked in a bookshop and loved books, it's like, oh, okay, that sounds good because you understand about ISBNs and da-da-da-da. Also think about, I think Jasmine kind of alluded to this, start doing little reviews, posting them if you're comfortable. Put them on LinkedIn, put them on Goodreads, put them on Amazon, put them on wherever. One of the best pieces of media we got recently was from a TikTok that somebody did from some young oceanographer, and it was about our book called At Every Depth, and it was really great. So if you do these things, it shows like, oh, okay, I get it. I'm engaging with books, and this is what this is how I think about them or whatever. So I think that'll give you a little edge. And then I guess finally, just don't think so. Think laterally. Right? So look at your bookshelf. This isn't a good example because they're the books I'm working on. But like at home, look at the books at home. Who's writing them? What are they? Is there a vertical within it? Is it climate? Is it, I don't know. And then look for those places that, and you might, like, let's say if it's St. Martin's Press, you might not get the exact division, but you can get an adjacent division, and then you can work your way in that way. So I think those are a lot of different ways. Oh, and then be a reader. Think about being a reader, like some agents. We didn't talk about agents, but like some of the books that come into the editorial through the authors come in through agents. There's so many agents, and some book places like probably Harper or like Penguin Random House. I don't think they even take a book unless it's through an agent, So agents are getting all these manuscripts, and they need somebody to be a reader and to take notes. That sounds kind of like a fun job to me. So whether it's getting some money for it or volunteering in some ways, that's I think a great way to kind of build your credentials and some of the places to look.
That's really great. And can you briefly just share, and I'm sorry if I didn't catch it, but what would be an example of like an entry-level job at Columbia University Press? Like what would students even be looking for? Obviously like an internship, but if one degree higher.
I mean, you could get probably a job, being like an assistant publicist, would be an entry-level job. Unfortunately, we don't have a lot of those. We're very thin, but in big houses, I mean, absolutely. Or think about magazines, which is going to have a very different cycle. Like, as we talked about, the production cycle of books is much longer. Magazines will be really fast. You might like that pace, So I think an entry-level job is kind of like an assistant, coordinator, yeah, and it might even be something more administrative. Like my boss, she started out as an assistant to two different heads, right? And after 4 months, the head of publicity left. And they said, hey, you want to give this a go? And it's like a sink or swim. You can do it for like 6 months. And if you do well, you get the job. If not, goodbye. So, it happened to work out for her. But I think that, assistants, coordinator, looking for those types of titles. And if you are open-minded, we have 60 people here. Some of them are accountants, some of the people are running traffic, for this or that or the other. So I think just being kind of open-minded and just take kind of what, yes, have your idea, and try to fish where you want to, where you want to work. Right. And that was like a big insight for me. I was just kind of taking all these job interview opportunities all over the place. And I was sort of like, ugh, but it's not what I want to do. And then I thought, you know what? I'm going to just start, like, I want to work at Columbia. I'm going to talk to people at Columbia. I'm going to talk to people at Columbia. And so I kept doing that. And then finally it led to this. So really be open-minded, but also have, where do you really, 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 really want to work, and try to figure out if you can just get in. And then once you get in, it can kind of take care of itself.
Yeah, I agree with that. I think keep an open mind. You might think that you really want to do one thing, and you might get in as an intern into like a big publishing house and realize, oh, I actually really love sales. And so like I do think there's some benefits to just going in, being willing to do like the grunt work at the bottom. You just have to do it. Like you have to pay your dues, go in sort of, but it also gives you this really great opportunity to see all these different things at once and figure out what you want. Also look at the spines of the books you like. Which imprints are the ones that you might want to look at, and then go look at their websites and see if they're hiring. And maybe if they're not, send them a note and say, hey, I really love this book. Same thing for agents. Send a note and say, I just finished this book. I noticed that you're the agent of the book. I just wanted to tell you, I really enjoyed it. I'm a graduate, from this prestigious English program. This is what I'm really wanting to do, but I would love to just pick your brain. There's no harm in asking for an informational meeting. When I first started at HBR, I knew nothing about business books, and I knew nothing about the production of any of those business books. And so I just started setting up meetings with people, at every editor, every production designer, jacket people, because I wanted to have like a full understanding of how this worked. I ended up staying in publicity, which was fine. I was happy where I was, but I don't think there's nothing to lose from having as many conversations as you can. Publishing is a very small community. Odds are you talk to one person and you say, I'm really interested in this. They'll know somebody that's interested or working in that field, and they can put you in touch for another informational meeting. And sort of just the more people that know that you're putting yourself out there and you're looking, the better. I think in terms of entry-level position, it's harder to do that on the agency side, just because we don't have the resources, A, and B, like once you get to the agency, everyone's sort of firing on like high cylinders. So I would say the easiest path, if you want to be in publicity and you want to work for like a boutique firm or something like that, start in-house, become a publicity assistant, get your bearings, understand how the whole process works. And then you sort of take that and kick it up a notch and go to the agency side.
Thank you. That's really insightful. It's nice to know, how to build upon, working in communications that way. And Jasmine, can you share maybe a little bit of insight on like the Milwaukee scene, or how to do it maybe in Milwaukee a little bit, or at a smaller city that might not be in New York?
Yeah, I think it is a little bit tougher in smaller cities just because so many of the big publishing houses are based in New York, or big cities kind of across the world. So there's fewer doors to knock on here to be like, hey, can I, get a job, etc. But what I have noticed is a kind of trend that's been coming up over the past few years, and I wish this had been a thing, or that I had known about it when I was coming out of college, because it might have changed my entire trajectory. But there are now like postgraduate like fellowships coming up. Like I know Source Books down in Naperville, Illinois, they're an indie book publisher, and they have a like summer-long like training program specifically for BIPOC, aspiring editors. And so they will, like, if you've just graduated, you can apply to the program, and they will teach you kind of a little bit of everything that they can about publishing. And then that kind of like primes you for applying for a job. So you have a little bit of experience, you have a little more knowledge of like what you want to do. And I think that can really help folks kind of narrow down like what jobs they're looking for, because once you're in the book world, you realize just how many different types of opportunities there are. And I don't think that's always clear when you're not already in it, which is kind of like you have to break in order to know, but how do you break in if you don't know? It's a weird cycle. So like looking for fellowships like that is really helpful. Almost all of those types of fellowships or programs I have found generally via Instagram, believe it or not. So as much as I was kind of railing about how social media doesn't work as effectively as it used to, a lot of people are still putting out their opportunities on Instagram, on LinkedIn, on like, if you get on their email newsletter, you can find out through there. And so just keeping an eye out on like all of, it might not be the start of your career. Like it might not be your full-time job, but you could do like a 1-year fellowship and get a lot of really good experience under your belt, and then decide like, I'm going to go into publishing, or I'm not going to do this. This isn't for me. So I would say like keeping an eye out for those kinds of programs is really helpful. And I agree, like there's no harm in asking people who are in the industry for their insights or their assistance, especially like, for example, I'm a UW-Milwaukee alum. So if a UWM alum reaches out to me, like I very much want to help them. And so I'm usually willing to kind of give as much of my time as I can. Like granted, it can't, help everyone, but I'm certainly willing to help as much as possible. And so I think just like reaching out to like anyone, like they will tell you stuff, they'll connect you to stuff. It's just, it's scary. Like asking people for stuff is terrifying, but the worst thing that can happen is they just say no, or they don't respond, and you just move on. So yeah, just making those connections is really, really great too.
I'll say one more thing, which is keep in touch with each other after you graduate. Like, I think you may all find your different paths, but if you have a listserv or something like that, oftentimes someone will land a job and say, hey, this company that I'm working for is looking for someone in a position. And I know when I graduated from the Summer Institute program from NYU's master's program, that was like a job funnel for a long time. And sort of people would just post on the listserv, we're looking for an assistant at this place. And so I would say things like that, and staying in touch with your classmates is always, you're like-minded, you have a lot of the same dreams and goals, I imagine. So help each other.
That's really great advice. I think that's wonderful, Nina. So we're at the moment where we can do like larger Q&A. So I know that there's some questions and comments in the chat. If you have additional questions, please post them. We'll try to get to a couple of them. I was just looking through, and I think a lot of these have sort of been covered to a different degree. But one thing that maybe we could talk a little bit about is just advice on marketing oneself for a publishing internship. So I'm just thinking a lot of students right now, summer internships like the source book one, Jasmine, that you were talking about a little bit, are coming up, deadlines are approaching. But how does one like best, market themselves, or what should they talk about in their cover letters, things like that?
Yeah, I can kick that off because I am, in fact, an internship supervisor for UWM. So I've also, I've got experience in that now, which is awesome. I think one thing that is kind of weird about the internship system is that it feels like a lot of companies are nowadays expecting students to be like these like high level experts with all these experiences under their belt and are just like the perfect candidate. Which is weird because the whole point of the internship is you don't have experience and you are learning, and you're trying to, fill those gaps by doing this, in-field experience. So it's a systemic issue where I think the expectations get higher, the bars keep getting like artificially lifted. And so students feel this pressure to like be like, I have to have everything on my resume and just be like the most perfect like person that they want for the next semester, right? And that's difficult. That's a big systemic issue. And I think it's on people looking for interns to kind of remember what an internship is supposed to be. But anyway, that being said, off my soapbox, I think that what is important is that when we're, receiving kind of internship applications or anything like that, a lot of your experience is going to look very similar to the classmate next to you. You're taking the same classes, you maybe have the same major and minor, you're in the same, you're a tutor for the writing center and you work for the library and you're on this literary journal. Like, you all look the same, and that's not a problem, but it's hard to differentiate, well, which one am I going to go with, or how do I place them based on resumes that are pretty identical, right? So what really at this level helps you stand out, I would say, is like be a well-rounded person with interests outside of books and outside of like the English department and all of that. Because like I love books, like I read them for work and then I go home and I read some more for fun. But like I also need other things that I need to be passionate about and that also help me make connections from books to the rest of the broader world. And so if that's something that you can show me, so like if you're an English major, you've got all these great things, but you're also like president of the campus birding club, and you can tell me about like all the birds on campus, and you can just like light up about that. That is going to help me understand a lot about you that your resume might not be able to put forth. So I can see maybe like, okay, you've got leadership experience, you've got writing experience, you're really passionate about this thing. Maybe I can get you to look at books about science because you care about science, all of that. So I think especially on the internship level, that's really the point where you can be a little more creative with how you present yourself and say like, hey, I'm really good at reading. I'm really good at writing. I have these basic skills that are necessary for the job, but also here's something that I bring to the company that you're not going to get from, the next person over. And so that, for me, it really helps me understand like, okay, great. This is how I can work with you and how I can help build you up. I don't think that necessarily works as well when you're applying to jobs. I mean, I did talk about like I used to do improv comedy, and I brought that up in my interview when I was, applying here at Porchlight, and that seemed to work. But I can't guarantee that's going to work everywhere. But at the internship level, I think it's worth giving it a shot.
I think that's such good advice, Jasmine. I don't know. I think I remember when my very first internship, my would-be manager asked me what 5 publications would I read if I could only read 5 and nothing else. And I just remember that question because I wasn't expecting it. And so I was sort of like, oh, what do I say? But I wanted him to know that I had these broader interests outside of books. And so, I think I said Bon Appetit and Vanity Fair and The New Yorker and other things. But I think, that is so important, showing that you're well-rounded, you have many interests, that you're passionate about those interests. I would say organization and being proactive is important. Like, don't just wait for someone to come to you. Don't be annoying about it, obviously, and there's a fine line, but I think making sure that you're putting yourself out there. And then I think, like I do think having a good attitude generally, and just kind of being willing to try different things, and okay, well, maybe I don't want to do sales initially, but this is what's available, and maybe it'll lead to something else. Or even asking once you get it, like, could I split this internship and do sort of like, they used to call it like a tour of duties. I think Reid Hoffman called it at some point, where you do, sales for a little bit, and then you do editorial for a little bit, and then you do publicity or marketing. And so I think, once you're in, you may have some flexibility depending on the place to sort of suggest, hey, I'm really interested in this other thing. Is there a way I can have a conversation with this person who runs that department, or better understand how these two departments interact, or things like that?
Yeah, and I think it's a vulnerable time, right, to be looking for jobs. And I think, as both Nina and Jasmine have said, all you can do is ask, to see somebody. And if they don't make the time, or if something that's not on you. It's like it's something going on in their life, and just, try to keep that in the back of your mind, as you go through the process. It's not on you. They're stressed, they're having a hard time. You never know what's going on in somebody's life. And so, but ask, and I think the word ask is important, because I think, trying to get to the point, like, what are you looking to do? Here is the ask, and I think that is something that, as I've gotten older, it's just like, oh, what is the ask? What does it ask here? What's the ask here? Because otherwise we can have all these like back and forth and blah, 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 but it's like people are busy, so what are you asking for? I think that's getting clear on that is important. Gently.
Yeah.
It's this idea of like confidence with humility, right?
Mm-hmm.
Definitely.
And I think it's also, like you were saying, it's just about hustling and knowing, I guess, what you're looking for. Knowing what you were saying earlier, Robyn, about which division, for instance, you really want to be in. So I think for the most part, a lot of these questions have been answered. And I guess I'm curious if people have more specific questions for you all, like how can they reach out or get in contact? What would the best way to be to connect with you over LinkedIn or over email, or what do you all prefer?
LinkedIn is
I'm
fine
happy
for me. Yeah.
LinkedIn. And I also will just say this. I'm the mother of 2 daughters, and gosh, talk about vulnerability, and Jasmine talking about how perfect all these kids have to be and feel that they have to be, and like amazing, like run a nonprofit, by the age of 16. It's crazy, like that, and that's, to me, honestly, I'm like, some of that doesn't feel very authentic. It feels like I'm trying to get into a fancy college or something. But what I would say is, like, if there are so many places, not just in New York, but like all over, like Jasmine was saying, and if you want to go to knitting, like there's publishers that do knitting and stuff, you know what I mean? But anyway, to get to the question, LinkedIn is great, and I'm happy to share, like via any of you, Jasmine or Kate, or you, Maria, my email. And then I'm also just taking it one step further. Like, if anybody needs to come through New York and needs a place to stay for a couple of days, I live in Manhattan, and I have like what I call the cousin quarters. And you're happy, like if you need a couple of days just to crash while you get yourself situated, I'm very happy to be that person.
That's so nice, Robyn.
That's so generous. That's so
You can too, Nina.
What did you say, Jasmine?
I was just saying I'm going to take up Robyn's offer on that. But no, in terms of getting in contact with me, I'm local. So if you ever like run into me at Collectivo, I guess say hi, but like don't be weird about it. Like tell me where you know me from, because I can't see any of you right now. I can only see the other 3 folks. But yeah, I'm on LinkedIn, and I'm sure we can share that link out. I can also share my email address via Maria and other UWM channels. But yeah, I think also if you just like go to like the Porchlight website, like it's easy enough to find my contact information there, or reach out through our social media channels. I can see those inboxes. So again, don't be weird, but you can find me. And yeah, like I said, especially if you are a Milwaukee person, and especially UWM, student or alum, I have an extra special spot in my heart for you. So I'm always happy to try to answer any questions as much as I can.
Well, thank you all so much. I know we can't see the people, but I'm sure they're all like clapping. If we could do like emojis, they'd have like heart emojis, all that kind of stuff. But I really thank you for your time and your valuable insight. I really appreciate it. I think this will be something that a lot of students will really come back to and watch again and again. And they'll probably take you up on some of your offers. We'll see, Robyn. You'll have to let us know if anyone takes you up on your offer to crash. But thank you so much. And I'll be sure, for people who are watching, if you want a copy of the recording, you can just email me, and I'll be sure to send that to you. So thank you again.
Thank you so much for having us.
Yeah.
Thank you. Thanks so much.